Hello, friends. This is the AlphaList podcast. I am your host, Toby. The goal of the AlphaList podcast is to empower CTOs with the info and insight they need to make the best decisions for the company. We do this by hosting top thought leaders and picking their brains for insights into technical leadership and tech trends. If you believe in the power of accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, if you're an experienced CTO, you will love the discussion happening in our Slack space where over 600 CTOs are sharing insights, or visit one of our events. Just go to alphalist.com to apply. Welcome to the AlphaList podcast. I'm your host, Toby. And today with me, tuned in from Bochum City, I want to welcome Daniel Hauschildt, or should I better say Dr. Daniel Hauschildt. Daniel is the co-founder and CPTO of a company called Imagely. And he is a rare example of someone who has like a big academic footprint and also a lot of entrepreneurial drive, because he's holding a PhD in electrical engineering for whatever reason. He has to tell us later, robotics, and masters in computer science. Daniel, like, what's behind your academic track?
Oh, what's behind it? Yeah, I mean, the short version, we can deep dive later. The short version is I started computer science with electronic engineering in the beginning. I was a bit bored, so I decided to do both things in parallel fully, electronic engineering. Went into robotics, was a lot of fun. I was involved in a lot of these robotics competitions back then. And at some point, to be honest, I was asked, hey, do you want to stay at the university and do your PhD? And I was pretty involved. And at that time, to be honest, I was pretty much into math and robotics and all these things. So I went on with my PhD and learned a lot in this time. But in the end, I can tell you already, I realized that academics is not for me for the long run.
So you ended up building SDKs. And that is what we want to talk about today. You founded Imagely in 2017, and I think you pivoted, right? It was basically like a image hosting service or something?
Yeah, it's a bit more complicated. The name Imagely exists far longer. It was one of the first hosting services for images for Twitter, before Twitter even had images. It was still part of an agency where I started back then. They had this domain and this name. It was not its own company. And that's where the name comes from. That's where everybody knows the Imagely domain from. And then from that, and everybody knows Twitter got their own images. And at some point, it was not a point anymore and nothing to build a business on. But the image and this term on photo editing and photos in general was still there. And when we then came to this Imagely idea, which is where we get to it later, like photo editing SDKs and such, this name was a really good fit. And we took this name and the brand and basically then started the SDK business.
And yeah, that's what we want to talk about today. The art and science of creating SDK businesses. I mean, it's a really niche topic, right? But I think it's super interesting what you did there and why, and who else is successful there, and what the key success factors are. Yeah, maybe we before we dig deeper, we start off with your nerd path. I mean, you already told us a bit about why you went more towards this direction, but maybe like, how did you get into computing? Let's start with that.
Yeah, this has been a long time ago. I don't even remember if I was 12 years old or something. I basically, even younger, I started with the C64. You probably remember that one. Before the Amiga even, like typical playing around with it, gaming, etc. But then quickly got interested in all these building stuff with a PC more. That was always me. I was always more like the building something guy, and the PC was the tool where I could use it for, right? And yeah, like I think there are many people in our group here which have a similar background, like starting early with 13, 14 and played around with it. And at some point, and really honest, I didn't want to pay for games, you know. And then I went into all these things about learning how do you say that without going to jail. learning how to go around the checks of games in entering your keys. And that's how I basically started learning about programming and all this architecture, assembly language. But to be honest, back then I didn't really know what I was doing. I was going through tutorials, trying to pattern match things. And that's how it all started, how I got into that. But this was just a side quest, and that got me into programming and building stuff. And from there on, I started with, Pascal back then, even before my C++ pass back then. Yeah, I got really interested, did many side projects, and then at some point started computer science studying. Yeah.
And now you sometimes in a way run a SaaS business, which isn't really a SaaS business because you basically don't have to host the software and don't have to offer it to your clients. But as I'm from the SaaS world as well, like I'm tempted to ask about your rough ARR numbers.
Let's say it's above 5 million currently, and going to 10, somewhere in between.
With like
above 5
and how big is your team?
It's like almost 50 people right now, all over Europe.
Okay, yeah. So that's a good revenue per FTE, or nice. And
yeah, we can also later talk about where we're going now and why that is maybe interesting for others.
Okay, yeah, cool. Let's do that. And let's start with maybe like a very broad picture on the best kept secrets of building an SDK business. Like, what is important to know?
It's important to know that just building something and saying there's a library on GitHub is not enough. So we learned a lot that marketing, in the sense developer marketing, like having really good documentation and examples, etc., makes a good SDK in the end, right? Because just having some functions and having some docs is nice, but once you get into a really complex system, the other developers also have to understand it and see what's good for, what they can build with it. It has to be found. You have to rank well for all the different cases you're working on. So pretty similar to many other things, but the developer is your target group, basically, right? And in our case, it's even a bit more complex or good. It depends how you see it. We have the developer, but also partially designer and the product manager. It depends a bit what part of the SDK we talk about. Because in our SDK, many people would think about an SDK as some library and some functions, but we also provide the libraries, the functions, but also full out-of-the-box UI. It's more like a white label solution, and you can go from starting to drop it in like a white label solution with some connection points we have to integrate up until a headless system where you build everything on top yourself and customize as you wish. And we have to go through all the loops. We go developer experience, we go through user experience, and everything as an SDK.
Cool. And you also, I don't know, measure the acceptance in all of those areas, or?
We try to, but really, really honestly, it's more we try to focus on like other core KPI numbers and try to think hardly with much of experience how to improve those typical lead generation conversion rates, customer lifetime values, like very typically, I think.
Okay, yeah. Okay. And so basically a good documentation is the best kept secret then?
I would say so. Honestly, that's what I learned the last 1 or 2 years only, to be honest. Because before you know how it is. You have a lot of developers who think, they know what to build for other developers. And they all like documentation, but they don't like writing documentation in general. It's a bit unfair, but it's like that. So mostly, even if everybody says you need a good documentation, while they have to do it, it becomes something like, oh, there's a function call. Here's the parameters. They do something. Must be enough. They will figure it out. But definitely that's not enough. So you need this really good experience in integrating your SDK. And this includes definitely documentation. We have lots of showcase examples. You will see this also with others for sure, right, these days. And so this is, I would say, the things that you might not think is the most important one, or one of the most important.
Do you have any companies you look up to? I mean, Stripe is like a classical example of very good documentation.
Yeah, definitely. Stripe has, to be honest, always been one of our references for good documentation. For a while, it was Twilio. I think today, not anymore. But also for sure, we look up to some other SDK companies because of details which separate library integrations from, let's say, what you called SaaS in the beginning, where you call against the cloud APIs and the heavy lifting is done on the servers. And you asked before, there are some others I can mention which really paved the way a bit and are like PDFtron or PSPDFKit from Peter Steinberger before, which is now named differently. They are rebranded, but that's they have always been a reference up until today. And now I would say we are on par, to be honest, but we looked up to them in the beginning. Yeah.
Okay. Not having cloud functionality hosted and taking care of that actually seems to be quite like stressless for me. Like not having to provide that like constantly running service and SLIs, SLOs. That seems to be like at first easy. What are the hard parts of it?
You're right. It seems easy, and it definitely has some advantages when it comes to what you have to pay for. On the other side, so we are doing photo editing, video editing on the client. And I think our problems relate more to problems people have when they're building games, that this game has to run everywhere smoothly and every different platforms. Just think about every browser is a bit different, then you have a different PC under it, different hardware in it. And we leverage hardware acceleration because without it, it's too slow. And so we run more into this complexity of supporting different browsers, different hardware. And when it comes to mobile, I can tell you the story about supporting Android. And this is, I would even say it's a mess, to be honest. We do it, but it's lots of effort to get it running on all the different devices. But it's also a selling point for us, for sure. Once you solved it, and others realize also it's very hard to do it, to get video encoding, decoding, and all that stuff working, then, yeah, you have a mode, more or less, right? Because it's not so easy. And that's I would say the bad part, right? It's running it everywhere, especially if you have to do all this processing.
Like web development in the early zeros or something, right? Then when there was still IE6 and everything was bad.
Yeah, I can tell you for us, Safari is the new IE6 because let's say Chrome supports more modern APIs for acceleration than like WebGPU, for example, or I don't know, video encoding. That's all still not that available on Safari, which makes our life a bit more like the E6 area. To support those, you have to do extra loops.
And everything you do is basically native for multiple platforms, right? Like iOS and Android, etc. And then you have to be able to support all those devices and be able to support, I don't know, Chinese phones that you can buy on AliExpress, same as I don't know, the iPhone.
Kind of, definitely. It's we build it all natively. We have a common layer written in C++ in there, which abstracts a bit of things. So we don't have to really duplicate our business logic, but we have to integrate with all the platform-specific details. And especially the UI layer, we decided, and we still believe in that, should be the native UI layer of the system. Like, for example, the DOM or like Swift UI or Compose, Jetpack Compose, things like that. And when it comes to devices, exactly. It's sometimes like that we get bug reports from a phone I've never seen in my life. And sometimes we can't even buy it. I mean, there are phones in the world that it's hard to get, right?
So how many phones do you have in your office?
It's really good questions. We have something like a distributed phone testing system. Every developer has at least one or two, which is in the platform. And we have some testers, which we got some more, the bad phones, let's say, because every time you test it on iPhone 14 or whatever, it works. But if you're using iPhone 8, it could be bad. And the same is for Android, right? There are the Google or Samsung top-notch devices, and they probably work and they are fast. But there are so many in between bad devices. So we try to figure out always like, okay, how do we get the best test approach? But really, to be honest, especially in the Android world, there's so many different device to chipset configurations to the camera, etc., that it's more like we try to do as good as we can. And unfortunately, sometimes we rely on bug reports from our customers, right? And then we go and fix the specific phone. Okay. Fortunately, it's not every day.
Okay. So. And how do you modularize your SDKs? I mean, I think you have to really ensure that components are reusable, extendable, and don't introduce unnecessary dependencies. And then you also have to maintain compatibility with like certain OS versions, etc. It sounds super complex if you really think it through.
Yes, it is complex. I mean, so first of all, we always try to support. We have, like everybody, every year we check which devices we support. For example, on iOS, we support the last, I think, 3 generations, and then the next year we see what we can throw out of the code, which is from the, let's say, an earlier generation. So it's checking this. How do we do it? So it's a really tough question, to be honest. I have to really think through it. So we have this common layer, which is just business logic that doesn't need much modularization because basically that doesn't change too much. But the integrations with the cameras and all these things, the device support, for sure, for each, for Android, there's there's just interfaces in our business logic, and we implement those interfaces. And we try even to do as much as we can in our business logic and really go low level. As an example, on iOS, there's a framework which does video seeking and the decoding of everything, and also the containers like MP4, MOV, etc. And we could use them from iOS, but that wouldn't be the same experience than on Android because they have a different parser, etc. So we implement the MOV and the container parsing in our core C++ thing and just implement the connection to the codecs itself, like H.264 decoder, encoder from the platform to leverage basically the hardware acceleration, etc.
Okay. Which answers part of my question, but I can imagine that it's super complex.
Yeah, I mean, our main components are basically, we have this layer of core business logic, which is one big component which shares everything which belongs to editing. And everything is like interfaces for the UI. We have a lot of UI APIs, so we're abstracting this all away and putting the UIs on top. So these are all its own modules maintained by their own team. And also we have on the other side the platform layer, we call it, which basically then per team has things like all this codecs, etc., per Android, per iOS, etc. And it gets even more complex because we also support things like Flutter, React Native, which is again also a story for itself. These all.
And how do you then handle like breaking changes? I mean, that must be also a mess.
Mm-hmm. You mean what kind of breaking changes?
Well, if you are breaking functionality that was there before and you release a new version, like.
Yes, we try to not do that too often because our customers don't like it.
Can you imagine?
Because also we have yes. So we still get away with just having the latest version maintained and nothing like LTS support or something. We have some 2 product lines, you have to know. We have what we started with, what is called Photo Editor SDK and Video Editor SDK, which became like in a LTS mode like 3 years ago. It's basically we don't break anything, but we also don't add much, but we fix up platform things when new iOS versions come out and things like that. And with our newest SDK, which is basically which does much more things, and also including the old functionality, we add new features, but we still try not to break too many things at once. So it's like either we deprecate first for a long time, and long time means probably longer than a year, and then see what happens, right? It's
And then image editing is like super compute intensive. Like, do you have like, I don't know, the biggest C++ nerds that can optimize to the bone of each device? And how do you do it? Or how do you do that otherwise? And what are the bottlenecks that you're facing, like especially working on mobile devices how do you overcome them?
Yeah. So obviously we have a lot of C++ people, but I wouldn't say they are the performance optimization. Their work is not performance every day. Also, the good thing is that for graphics editing and video editing, if you leverage the hardware decoders and let's say a modern GPU, which is almost in every phone these days, you can do these things very well. Our performance is more suffering in terms of algorithms. You have to imagine we are not editing mostly with one image, but whole scenes like in InDesign. You have a whole document with multiple text layoutings, with multiple images, multiple decoders, and then the complexity comes more into clever caching and all these things. And then it becomes typical. Yeah, really, we do performance. There are these performance monitoring tools in every tool set, right, on Xcode, etc. And you look where are the bottlenecks, and then either you have to really restructure the algorithm, or sometimes even exchanging some libraries or things like that. It is all the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Crazy. Sounds like
it's a lot of work, and sometimes the hardest part for us is that scenes can theoretically become arbitrarily big, and there's always a limit. So it's always like a best effort because it's never enough. So because we go from image editing to photo books to like these yearbooks you might know from our school, or especially in the US, it's far bigger, right? There's 100 pages with images and text, and there's always a limit, but we realized with clever caching and things like what is in view and all these things, you can optimize a lot. I feel sometimes like working on a game, to be honest, because it feels like it. Like, there's a world and you have to figure out what's visible and performance optimize it, that it runs on devices, and maybe not only the best devices, but even there, it's really hard for us to determine what is the average device, because you will always have some customer which comes up and says, hey, 3 of my users have reported it doesn't work well on their Chromebook X Epsilon.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to make a decision, right, with the customer mostly.
And is it then that you purely focus on mobile devices, or I don't know, did you also realize, hey, on this Chinese car, there's also our image editor embedded because people needed to be able to edit their photos, or?
No, honestly, mostly not. Sometimes it's tablet devices, and I realized also, so we have a few customers which do this in-store tablets where you can, do a simple designs like if a kid's T-shirt, and then you can put a Mickey Mouse on it and the name on it. But this is still a tablet, and that's mostly either Android or a web browser running on it, right?
Okay.
So it's not like, let's say, Tesla OS optimizations or something like that.
Okay, I mean, they also run Android, so should be possible. But, okay.
Yeah, so
and then when it comes to like new or those cross-platform frameworks such as like Flutter, React Native, or others, do you support that as well? Like, how do you integrate that in your strategy?
Yeah, we currently have Flutter and React Native support. Obviously, there are lots tinier things more we don't support, like native script or some variants of that. But mostly, it's like we have this. The good thing is we realize how markets work quickly with our inbound, what we get as requests, right? So we have already all the native versions. We always start with the native versions because of performance. And then when we go to, let's say, for example, Flutter, we first just wrap it into the Flutter environment. We don't rewrite everything in, let's say, Dart, but try to, as best effort, just do a thin wrapper at first to help people integrate it quicker. Mm-hmm. But then, and we have a lot of APIs, we don't convert all APIs at first to the Dart version of it. So then you still have to use, let's say, I don't know, on Android, the Java or Kotlin or whatever to let's say, customize all the details. Mm-hmm. And then it's a market research thing, right? The more customers you get, the more requests. It's our day-to-day, right? Business development. You look at it. There's so many people using React Native Flutter these days. And then we hear their feedback. Some say, we don't even can code Kotlin. And then we think about it. And sometimes we start adding the most important APIs. But that's the day-to-day, basically.
And then you have to write documentation, have to publish content on it, have to do all of that so that it's actually also being used and adopted, right?
Yes, especially documentation. When you launch Flutter, you should have Flutter documentation. Yes. Like I said, the good thing is that the documentation scales with the APIs that have to be converted. So getting started and the examples for sure. And then in the beginning, we always can refer to the native the native APIs, and then the docu is the same. But yes, if you really want to go strong in a certain wrapper, you have to treat it as their own platform. That's the point. And you can only try to reuse technology in the background, either C++ or some iOS code or whatever.
And do you have one secret tool that you use for documenting? Like one thing that really helps you a lot, which you publish all your docs in, or?
We tried so many things, and to be honest, we are currently in the process of rewrapping all our documentation nth time and making it better. But now, after all, we end up again having our own Astro Markdown thing, and doing everything in there and statically compiling and publishing it. No magic bullet, unfortunately. I'm still searching for it.
Okay, yeah. Seems to be like an ever-going quest, right? What about AI and your adoption of AI? Like, I can imagine that like many clients request it these days, like I don't know, background removal, stuff like that. Is that something you do as well?
Yeah, partially. So we have at some point we realized we cannot do everything and integrate every AI on the planet. Especially it started with Gen AI, right? And then there's now avatar generation, there's audio generation. It goes pretty far, and LLMs for sure. So a few months ago or a year ago, I don't know, we started integrating. We have something like a plugin system, basically. So you can hook into all our functionality and integrate whatever you want there. We have some examples. So we ship an integration with some generative AI. We also have our own background removal, for example, which is also built on the plugin system. But normally we work together with customers, and we also, as one can imagine, have a few which come from the image generation and then need an editor. But they can basically hook it completely into our ecosystem. And then it feels like it was always be part of our system.
Okay.
Yeah. But you can go so far and even build your own panels and toolbars and buttons inside our editing experience.
Okay. So a bit like a lightweight Photoshop, I guess.
Lightweight Photoshop, yeah. Easy to use Photoshop, I would say. That's maybe easy to use.
Okay. And I guess then also you have some functionality which even runs on servers, right? Like that, I don't know, evaluating models locally on a device might be complicated or not performant enough. Like then you also have a server part. So like your business is at the end more complex than a typical SaaS business, I would say.
Yeah. That's a simple answer, I guess. Yes, it's more complicated. For sure, we always try to do everything client-side first. For example, even the background removal, we made it work client-side completely with neural networks, etc., which also saves our customers a lot of money because normally you pay per remove or some credit system or whatever. We ourselves currently don't have any server-side things unless for demonstrators, but we help customers. We also have a server version of our own SDK, you have to know, and help them set it up in their infrastructure and things like that. So we still shy away a bit from maintaining our servers in scale and doing all the DevOps things you probably know very well for now. AI somehow pushes us a bit more into this direction. So it's a constant negotiation inside the company and more a strategic question. Should we open this Pandora's box, how I say? Because first of all, our people are mostly not experienced in that at the moment, which sure, all are clever, all are good, can learn it, but we are more like this client-side, on-device, libraries, usage type of company, right? But yeah, the first thing I can tell you what we will provide soon is like something like a proxy to proxy the communication to all the AI stuff. But we won't run the models ourselves.
Okay, interesting. From my perspective, it's like super hard to see what the end game here will be, right? Like, do you think at a certain point you reach a limit when you just say, hey, this far and no further? And I mean, this, like, we built an image editor and now I don't know, we're reinventing everything which is in photo editing. Like, where is, like, from your perspective, what's your end game?
Yeah. So you have to know our vision was always, so we came from something else. We always had, this is simple story. So it was always like, do you know the problem of design handovers? So somebody builds something in Photoshop, then maybe converts it to a format which a marketeer can use. Let's make it simple, where they converted to Keynote. It was at least back then. It got a lot better with Canva these days, to be honest. But this was our goal. And so our whole SDK, there's a other side to it, which we are developing, what we call Studio. It's basically a template creation process where you can basically build designs and ship them to our SDKs. So you can use pre-built designs in any workflow. That's our vision. So mostly customers that we have DAMs, CMSs, where they don't want to leave the creation process for the assets, you know? And so we embed the whole editing experience directly in the workflow. That's our goal for all of design, basically. So that's why we went from photo to video to compositions like books, videos, complex scenes, etc. So, and we have more and more customers these days, especially the last 2 years. And now with AI, creative automation also becomes more interesting. Additionally, that basically extend the current offering. Either they come from the publishing side or they come from the CMS side, and they go and want to integrate the generation of designs, the update of designs, the variation creation of designs, all in their platform without leaving it to a third party, and also having all these things. And that's one of the main, it's one of the main target groups or target markets we go into currently are in already. I mean,
so mass customization of
it's mass variations, multi-channel publishing, especially also all these problems like you build one design, one different backgrounds, one different messaging, different languages, different sizes, like video output for wheels or static output. You name it, right? So there's a lot of output material you need to generate these days, or you want to. And that's honestly all in one editing experience and can even be configured to if you want to focus on one specific thing. Right?
Okay. And that like ultimately sounds as if you compete then with really big companies.
Yeah, I think indirectly, right? Because for sure, if you name Canva or something or Adobe, let's say they are not so much in this SDK deep integration market, at least not yet. And I haven't seen any move to do that. They still want you to join their platform, right? So you always have something. There was something what was called Canva button, where you could add your Canva account to a third party, and then in the CMS you have a redirection to Canva, use your stuff, and go back. But our approach is different. So we want it to be part of the application of yourself or someone else, right? So much tighter integration, much deeper integration. But yes, indirectly we compete. But I would say like Adobe, for example, focuses much more on the designers itself. Yeah.
Coming back to your team, you said 50 people and above 5 million, which is nice. How many developers do you have? Is it all developers or?
No, it's not all developers, but a lot for sure. We have, I would have to count, but it's like 35 developers probably, something like that, 30 to 35. Also, since we are doing a lot of designers, we have UI designers, UX designers. Actually, I think 4. No, I know 4 of them. We have the sales team in-house. We have the marketing team in-house. But I think comparingly to other companies, for example, marketing is 2 persons currently, and sales is 3 to 4. And we are mostly doing inbound sales,
right,
at the moment. So there's even a lot of untapped space for us to go broader. But for now, for our current growth, for how we grew and how we work and where we come from as engineers, it was easier and more clear to grow from the inbound and SEO, SEA.
Yeah, I would say that this is really like a PLG product, right? Like you basically look up documentation, you basically search for a solution, and then you somehow end up there. I think like really defining your ICP and then I don't know doing code outreach might feel a bit odd, right?
Actually, this ICP topic has been a long ongoing discussion in the company, how to define it properly. And to do that, it's really hard, right? There's even this discussion I'm having what the ICP can be of an SDK. So normally I would go into a certain industry, just double down, make your product perfect for this certain scenario, right? And then if that works and you scale there, maybe expand. But in our case, I mean, we are an SDK, right? We can build whatever you want to build eventually. And now the problem starts, or it's good and bad at the same time. It's bad for product management. It's good because you get a lot of inbound information, what's out there, and you get the info, what people are building. So I could basically create a trend document every year, like what people want to build and what's trending right now. Like Gen AI for sure is the thing right now, even in design and video generation, obviously. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but there are also other movements, which we always see then, right? Because people are asking for it. And then we can decide if we adopt into it, if we spend resources on it, if feature development goes in the direction. But I still feel product development and management and decision making, unfortunately, very hard due to the unclear or unnarrow target group definition there. So
understood.
yeah.
Do you have, I mean, we mentioned documentation early, maybe a few more tips for people that are building an SDK or want to be better in building SDKs? Maybe not explicitly towards like DevRels and building communities, etc., but also covering that?
I mentioned, so we started on GitHub and we pushed out a simple library for photo editing, very simple, and had only a few entry points, not much to configure, and all these things. There's some, I think there's let's go from different perspective. If you think about libraries that everybody will know, like OpenSSL or things like that, you think about all this unitary functions to compose your own stuff, etc. But it's actually, I think these days, also developers want simplest version, one function call that does most of the heavy lifting with a good result. So, and this configurability and details are only later steps. I always say going to the rabbit hole. Once you master that, you go deeper. But if you present, let's say, just a library like this typical generated, I generate myself the TypeScript documentation reference, and you see this 10 pages of function calls. That's not how you should present it, right? You should have that one purpose-driven entry point. I give you an example. We recently released background removal as an open source library a year ago, and it just had one entry point: remove background image,
remove background
image out. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's simple and understandable. And later you add configurations for all the edge cases if you want, right? For me, UX is the same.
Produce PDF.
Sorry, produce PDF.
Produce PDF.
Unfortunately, we can, but a different story.
Yeah. Okay. Any other tips?
Like I said, I still think it's even in developers, it's all about usefulness and the job to be done. I really like this approach of understanding what does the user want to do. And if it's a developer, they also want to do something. They don't want a library. You know what I mean? It's all about getting away from that, I'm coding or building or shipping some stuff. It's more about the product experience in the end, overall. UX, DX, and its understandability is very important. We learned when we still have this day-to-day thing where we add more functionality, understanding what's possible gets harder and harder. And we always rethink that, right? And always work on, how can we make the specific use case very obvious, right? And from the APIs and from the UX.
Okay. Thank you. So I hope that is helpful for like many of the SDK builders out there. I slowly want to come to the end and actually have I have a secret question here prepared for you, where I had to reach out to Eray, your co-founder, and he told me about a little Easter egg in your early Objective-C version of your image API, which is the time machine feature, which allows us to travel back in time if we just use a certain feature flag. And we now have the chance to just imagine traveling back in time to the year 2017 when you just started Imagely, and whisper something like an advice into your younger self's ears. What would you say?
Honestly, I would say you don't know what you're getting into. It's so much more work than you think. Yeah, actually, really, I'm honest. It's much more complicated than I thought when I started, but I still believe that a bit of naivety is always good to start a company, and I would still do it again. Yeah.
So if there was hair on your head, it would all be gray, or what?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, but I'm good. Don't get me wrong. I'm really good. I like what I do. But like I said, there's so many details to developing a good SDK besides what you think I write the code. So. And you will have to dig deep into that. Yeah.
Okay. Really looking forward to see what happens with your company and what the big game plan is at the end and where you end up. And I don't know, which private equity company will at a certain point buy you for $1 billion or something.
We will see. I can just tell you that mid of the year, next year, we will definitely launch something. Let's see.
Definitely launch something. That
a lot of work we have done the last years is being consolidated right now. So
okay. Looking forward to see what you're definitely launching. Thanks a lot, Daniel. And yeah, have a great Christmas time. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the AlphaList podcast. If you like this episode, share it with friends. I'm sure they love it too. Make sure to subscribe so you can hear deep insights into technical leadership and technology trends as they become available. Also, please tell us if there is a topic you would like to hear more about or a technical leader whose brain you would like us to pick. AlphaList is all about helping CTOs getting access to the insights they need to make the best decisions for their company. Please send us suggestions to cto@alphalist.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter. After all, the more knowledge we bring to CTOs, the more growth we see in tech. Or, as we say on AlphaList, accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth. See you in the next episode.